Hello again, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's Opening Bell podcast. And what a show it promises to be as well. I think this might be just about the best fight we've ever previewed on the podcast in Beterbiev against Bivol. I think it might be. Usyk Fury, I suppose, comes close. You could argue, I suppose, Canelo against Bivol was an interesting one. Terence Crawford against Spence probably got people excited. I think Beterbiev against Bivol might just be the best fight we've ever been about to talk about on the pod. How are things, Matt Christie?
Yes, they're good, mate. Really good. Got up at 5 o'clock this morning. Now it is about 9:30. So I got up at 5 o'clock, went to the gym. I also had a swim while I was there, out in the open, in the dark.
Look at those guns. I'm looking at his guns, folks. Wow.
I had a swim in the dark, got back, and then I watched Nigel Benn versus Chris Eubank 2, the entire hour and 20-minute broadcast. And I've got to be honest, I loved every second of it. Pure theatre. Someone needs to make a film out of that. Just call it Benn Eubank. Be absolutely fantastic.
Well, that's This Week in History. That's what we're going to be talking about. Benn against Eubank from early October in history, 1993. Yeah, take you back. That was my first year at uni. I think I was probably too busy doing other things that autumn, but what a time. And yeah, I mean, so much so, they had a preview show, didn't they? Prior to that, Best of Enemies. I think the night before or a few days before the big bill as well. So that whole ITV Big Fight live broadcast is just a wonderful special trip down memory lane. Like you, I watched all of it. It is absolutely fantastic. So we're going to be talking about that. Benn Eubank 2, This Week in History. We're going to be talking about the big Saudi bill. That's Beterbiev against Bivol, which I think is just a fantastic fight. Two of the best light heavies around. Wardley Clark as well in a rematch if we just get 50% of what they gave us first time around, that will be one hell of a fight. And then the betting's lopsided in the other ones. But we're going to talk all about that as well coming up this weekend. Now, before we go on, we should address Steedgate. Rantgate from last week. But as with all things, Matt, isn't it? Sometimes it'll come as a shock to people when you let things simmer and fester, when things just they all end up going too far, and then finally it reaches a head and it all comes out. Actually, when I listened back to the pod last week, it was nowhere near as violent or vociferous as I thought it might have been. But anyway, let's just address, because plenty of you via the Patreon app, on Twitter, messages, loads of you have got in touch with us, and thanks for all of that. We really appreciate that, particularly the Patreon's ongoing support, and more of you have signed up. Nowhere near enough, but more of you have signed up, which is great. Let's just address one or two of the points that were mentioned. Obviously, we're not associated in any way with Boxing News. Matt was one-time editor. I wasn't associated with Boxing News other than being part of the pod, but we're no longer and haven't been for, 6 months?
Since April.
Since April, right. Okay. So, 6 months ago. And even then, when we were associated, or Matt was working as editor for Boxing News, Matt was doing the pod as an add-on. That was additional time out of his week. He wasn't getting any extra pay for that, but that's no matter. He was getting a salary from Boxing News. I was getting pocket money, I think it's fair to say. Is that a fair assessment, Matthew?
I think it is fair assessment, yes. I think it is.
To put it in perspective, it would be quarter, fifth of other work I would get, be a seventh or eighth of generally commentary work I'd get, maybe a tenth of commentary work I might get on a good day, a 15th of what I got when I did Channel 5 presenting about 7 years ago, just to give you some perspective. So it was some money per show, but it was pocket money. When ID came along, they gave me a little bit more, but not much. It was, again, pocket money. But that's kind of besides the point. those of you who are on Spotify and Amazon, the money you pay for that, none of that's coming to podcasters. And really, you're paying for Amazon Prime, and that is to get your deliveries, books, shopping, whatever, earlier, free of charge. And it's also related to things that you might get, TV shows, films, music, etc. Music essentially is at the core of Spotify. None of that is filtering down to podcasters. I think one or two thought that their monthly fee to those platforms was in a way playing for podcasts, and it isn't. So let's clear that up. Let's also clear up the idea. Someone messaged me on Twitter suggesting that I was moaning about having to watch boxing. We love watching fights. We love doing all the research that we put in, but it isn't a case of turning up every week, having watched a few fights, and then we just open our mouths and let our bellies rumble. That's not how this podcast is put together. Maybe other podcasters, maybe others in broadcasting operate in that way. That's not how we do it. I searched for 30, 40 minutes this week just to try and find out what Nigel Benn's ring walk tune was. That's the level of commitment that we put into this podcast. I managed to find it, folks. I know what it is. We'll tell you that a bit later on. So we love putting the pod together. And I just wanted to read out a message from Richard Lavin. Richard, who's a Patreon subscriber of ours. Thanks for the message, Richard. He said, love the pod. And he's a subscriber, he's a Patreon. And one of the things he loves each and every week is that when the dog hears the intro music to the opening bell, the dog knows that it's walk time. Richard knows that it's pod time, and between them they go off into their worlds. They do it together for different reasons, but they're unified in that experience. So thanks for that, Richard. And that essentially is one of the reasons that we have kept carrying on, is that we know for you it's a community, and I'm speaking for me, but I think I'm speaking for Matt, and the fact that we know, without getting too carried away with it, we know that we're kind of part of your lives each and every week. And I take that responsibility, I take that relationship seriously. And that's important to us. Now, it's not enough that I turn up every week and will continue to do so just for charity, for nothing. I don't think anyone can necessarily do that. I give to charity and I give up my time to charity as well. But when it's part of your working week, I don't think that's necessarily acceptable. So there is only so long that kind of can carry on. But we love doing it. We love being part of it. We want it to continue. We just feel it's fair to be paid, recompensed, rewarded at something just resembling what might be considered the going rate. And at the moment, we're earning practically nothing off it. And now we have had more Patreons. I think another 30 plus signed up the other day. That's still, we're at least half, a third of the way short of what's going to be required. We also got good news as well. We think we've got good news in the next 2 weeks as well. Looks like we might have a sponsor lined up as well. We've been in communication with them. So that could be fantastic news, and that could help us well on our way. But again, just the bare bones of it, we probably need 2 to 3 times as many Patreons, and probably 2 to 3 such sponsors to get anywhere near what would be considered the going rate. So it's not pleading poverty. It's just about what I think is fair. And you'll have your own reasons for why you want to be involved in that. As I said last week, if you don't think it's worth anything, that's fine. That's not a problem for me. We'll go our separate ways. If you can't afford it, then I totally understand. It's a hard world out there, and it's getting harder. So I totally understand that. And I think we all believe that this should be free for a good portion of people. I think there should always be a free version of this, and we believe in that. So if that applies to you, then that's fine. If you think it should be absolutely free and we just give our time up and our commitment, and more importantly, you're paying for our ability and our talent. That's part of the rub as well. So those are all of the ingredients. But let's get this straight. We love doing it. We want to do it. It's just whether in December, and we're going to commit to December one way or another, hopefully alongside our sponsor, hopefully alongside the Patreons. There's going to be more bonus pods coming up. Matt and I have got one for this week for the Patreons as well. So we absolutely want to make this work, and we're going to try everything in our powers to make it do so. But you've all got a responsibility to be part of that as well.
I think it's moving positively now. And just to reiterate what Alex said, personally, I cherish this time. I really enjoy this podcast. I feel like I am amongst friends in a curious sort of way, and that's not just talking about Alex. I feel like the vast majority of people that listen to this week in, week out are people that I would happily sit down and have a beer or two with. And I can't say how much that means to me. It means an awful lot that the people that are paying now are paying, even the amount that we've got. I'm chuffed. I'm happy. I'm really grateful. And something else, which I'm not sure Alex just mentioned, is that it's not just us two. There's four of us as well that are working on the podcast, and we simply split it four ways. So yeah, I personally am more optimistic than Alex is. But I agree with everything Alex says. I can also understand some of the gripes that we've had, and I'm conscious that I don't want to be banging on about this for much longer at the start of a boxing podcast.
Sure.
But some of the things that did make me think was when people say, well, hang on a minute, I'm paying for Spotify and I'm paying for Amazon Music. I'd never considered that, simply because I listen to my podcasts on the free podcast app that I've got on my phone. So I didn't consider that people were already paying and then are being asked to pay more. So I understand some people might find that a bit much. But yeah, just to reiterate, we love doing this, the old opening bell. And I would genuinely hate to stop doing it. Anyway, Alex, let's crack on.
Boxing. A couple of sort of news lines. First of all, young Stephen Smith's boxing gym is starting to flow and embellish and bring on fighters. I see Kevin Ajarko has joined Stephen Smith in recent days was one news line. And obviously Anthony Yard was flagged up as going to box and appearing on the 19th of October Adam Azim O'Hara Davies bill. Frank Warren, I think, was on TalkSport just the other day saying, well, yeah, we'll see about that. And he didn't want to be pushed or answer the question. You know what that means. You know, we're talking about the legal issues behind the scenes. So where they're at in their relationship, where the Yard can box on with another promoter on another bill, who knows? But as is often the case, that might end up in the courts.
I mean, I have to look at it from Anthony Yard's point of view. I don't know all the ins and outs of this. I doubt anybody does, really, apart from Yard himself and Frank himself. But looking at it from Yard's point of view, he will be eager to get his career going. And we have seen numerous fighters, their progress stall as a consequence of rows with promoters. It's all down to contracts. I'm sure Frank wouldn't be doing what he's doing if he didn't have a contract in front of him that he felt should retain Yard services. But from the boxer's point of view, he's not earning at the moment. He's not fighting, and he's at an age now where he needs to be. Particularly with what's happening this weekend that we're going to talk about, Beterbiev versus Bivol. Yard really should be in pole position to challenge the winner, but he's just not active.
Don't think Frank's lawyer earns quite as much as the Manchester City QC stroke solicitor, but he's probably pretty busy. Pushy.
I'd imagine so. I would imagine so.
Do you know what? We did a bonus pod for Patreons, a one-punch knockouts. I remembered one that we didn't include. Do you remember, speaking of Stephen Smith, one of the Smiths brothers, do you remember the left uppercut that Lee Selby produced in round 8 in their 2011 fight. We could have put that on, well, we could have put it in discussion to go on the list. That was he's down for minutes, wasn't he, Smith, after that one?
Yeah, I was there for that. It was a shocking result. I think Smith was the favourite going into that. And then poor old Paul Smith, if memory serves me correctly, was the next one who was due into the ring after that. I think Paul Smith was in a floater. I mean, I can only imagine what that was like.
Yeah. That was on one of our bonus pods. We've got another one coming up this weekend for patrons as well. But yeah, that one-punch uppercut from Selby on Smith could have been in that discussion. And Lee Wood was quite active on socials throughout last week, Matt. Sounds like his kind of Matchroom DAZN contract has come to an end, and he is sort of angling for one of those big fights at featherweight. He was quite busy sort of putting his name out there and seemed to be getting a lot of traction on that.
Yeah, and as he should. Another fighter who needs to be active. One of Britain's best we were talking about, yet he has kind of slipped off into the shadows a little bit, and he needs to be active. He's at an age where he's got to be putting money on the table, and he is in pole position, really, to be getting the big fights, and he's not being discussed.
Let's just look very quickly back on the fights from last weekend before we move on to all that's coming up this weekend. Down under in Australia, it was probably as prescribed or as expected, really, with Janibek simply way too good for Andrei Mihailovic, the Russian-born Kiwi fighting in Australia, in Sydney. Round 9, looked like he was going to stop him in the second. Actually, he absolutely hammered him in the first couple of rounds. And Mihailovic just basically got by on raw courage, didn't he, Matt? He was simply outclassed throughout that fight and ultimately quite comfortably beaten.
I thought Mihailovic would put up more of a contest than that, in all honesty. I was a little bit perplexed with Janibek after that second round. It looked like Mihailovic was there and he was ready to go at any point, yet he took him till the ninth. Mihailovic got kind of a second wind of sorts, but I'm not sure his senses were completely with him while he was riding that second wind. Janibek, almost by default, isn't he, is the leading middleweight in the world at the moment. And one hopes now that he can get some kind of fight that is befitting of the world middleweight champion. But after so long with the middleweight division being the most fascinating of all landscapes, it's lost a little bit of lustre in recent years, probably since Canelo left, probably since Golovkin walked away, essentially. And that often happens when you have fighters of that magnitude leave the division behind for whatever reason. There's a little bit of jostling for position with those that are left behind.
And with Janibek or Alam Khanula, did you think maybe the year out played a part, or did you think maybe his previous weight problems at middleweight a few months ago impacted upon his ability maybe to finish that a little earlier?
The weight issue raised alarms when it occurred a few months ago, as it should. And his performance didn't necessarily do much to erase those concerns. I'm not saying that is the reason for his slightly listless performance, but it might well be. So I'm sure his team will be looking at that. But there's a huge opportunity for someone in the middleweight division to take it by the scruff of the neck and rule.
And up in Liverpool, Nick Ball probably did what he was supposed to do against Ronnie Rios. Great credit to Rios at the age of 34. I mean, he had a go in a far fight where he probably wasn't really equipped to compete, having a go in that kind of fight against a 27-year-old sharpshooter, busy, energetic, handful of a fighter like Nick Ball. And I suppose Rios was always on borrowed time, but great credit to him that he was able to at least punch with Ball in some or most of those exchanges for nearly 10 rounds. But I think the inevitable finally happened.
I think when you're about to walk through the doors of Last Chance Saloon, the last person you want greeting you and guarding those doors is someone like Nick Ball. So yes, full credit to Ronnie Rios for the fact that he obviously gave it absolutely everything he had. I think there was a few whispers behind the scenes that he had kind of resigned himself to retirement if he lost. I don't see where he can go from now. Go from there, particularly against someone like Nick Ball, who, although he is one of the world's best, some people may say he's not invincible. So Rios now will be thinking, okay, what do I really want from this sport? What can I get out of it? And his options are walking away with his head held high, or he goes to gatekeeper, takes a lot more punches than he needs to. But he gave it everything. And I thought Nick Ball was fantastic as well, to be perfectly honest. I think Nick Ball is getting better and better. I think his stamina astonishes me every time I see him fight. How he just unleashes the same amount of shots in round 1 as he does in round 9, round 11. We've seen it in championship fights in round 12. We've seen him fall behind early, and we've seen him rally hard down the stretch. Nick Ball may not be invincible at the moment, but if he continues to improve at the rate he's improving, he's going to be exceptionally hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, you feel the number of punches he throws that a kind of technical sharpshooter should be able to unpick him and expose him. It's kind of what you think. But then, he has been in with a Ray Ford and a Vargas, so he's been in with fighters who have some of those qualities, some of them. Or you think he's going to go in against the guy who can match all the things that he does. The energy, the punch output, maybe the punch power, and certainly the mental strength. And the guy who springs to mind for all of that, which could be a fight of the year for me, is Figueroa. Figueroa, Nick Ball? Yes, please.
Yeah, that's a terrific fight. I was thinking that at the weekend, actually, when I was watching the Nick Ball fight, then I was glancing down the rankings, and Figueroa versus Nick Ball would be terrific. You could say there's shades of Paul Hodgkinson about Nick Ball, and Paul Hodgkinson was someone who in the end found someone who could stand up to his shots and knock him out. But Nick Ball just looks so immovable at times. You say that about someone will be able to unpick him. I think that's a really good point. Vargas had some success doing that early on, but he simply couldn't sustain it, whereas Ball just got stronger and stronger, did not get deterred in the slightest. And I think there's his physical gifts, but I think there's an awful lot of evidence there that psychologically he's exceptionally robust. Not a lot bothers him, and I think that will serve him really well. I think he could be around for a good few years yet, wearing belts or the same one that he's got now.
I'd love to see that Figueroa fight, and promotionally, broadcaster-wise, that might be more doable than, say, Angelo Leo or Rafa Espinosa. And, of course, you got Fulton back in the mix as well. Other names there, but Figueroa would appear the one. And quickly, Jack Rafferty, take a bow, because he was on the wrong end of it, wasn't he? He was getting outboxed through sequences, but he just kept his focus, kept his discipline, kept belief in his own skill set that it might come good in the end. And it did against Henry Turner. And Rafferty it was who found another stoppage, Matt. That's 4 on the bounce. His career is just gone from strength to strength to strength, and strength mentally and physically to his big assets.
Yeah, and that was really exhibited wonderfully on Saturday. I was on duty for Boxing Scene, so I was kind of trying to write a live report, which I am horrendous at. But anyway, the way that you do that, you have to kind of be reporting on it round to round as you go. So essentially you top and tail it when the fight is over. And if you read that report, and I wouldn't advise anybody to go searching for it, but if you do read that report, you can see that I'm leaning to the fact that Turner's about to win this fight. Turner looks like the smarter, sharper, better boxer. And then it was all of a sudden just turned on its head. Yeah, terrific result, terrific performance.
He was indeed. He's now the British and Commonwealth champion at £140. Well done to him. I noted last night, actually, just before I was about to go to bed, there was a tweet from VADA championing the WBC's kind of all-round testing programme and saying how wonderful that and they were. I did reply to them and say, that's true, that's great, but it's kind of pointless if you're not going to do anything about the positive tests when they come forward.
I'll be interested to see if you get a reply to that. I doubt that you will. I mean, my opinion on the WBC, and I've got far more time for Maurizio Sullivan than you have. I don't think he's a bad bloke. I think he embraces new ideas. I think he looks to bring positive change into the sport. But I think when that changes potentially affects his relationships with certain people, it can get quite difficult, and he finds it hard to make the decisions that he should be making. But when that clean boxing program came into effect, I thought this is what the sport needs. Mm-hmm. It's the only way that we can begin to battle against the problem that is performance-enhancing drugs in boxing. Yet, I can't think of a single occasion where the World Boxing Council have punished somebody that has taken performance-enhancing drugs. And you would think, really, that at least one or two of them who have been caught with illegal substances in their body knowingly put those illegal substances in their body in order to gain an advantage in a fight. It would be incredibly unfortunate if all 7, 8 of them, however many there's been, did it by accident, wouldn't it? And if they are all doing it by accident, then perhaps we need to look at the rules again, because it's giving out the wrong message every single time.
I think the worst thing really is, Matt, that in the eyes of the WBC, or probably more likely Maurizio, is that it has come down to not a positive test in their eyes, but the character or the perceived character of those people who have failed the tests. You know, we believe in him. I know his father, he said about Conor Benn. I think they're a trustworthy family, all of that stuff. I mean, it's irrelevant, mate. It doesn't matter whether you know him. It doesn't matter if he has been a great guy. It doesn't matter if you think he's a great guy. He's totally irrelevant. If something ends up in someone's system, they have to explain how it got there. And if they can, you're banned. It's as simple as that. It's called the strict liability rule. That's what we're playing with. But anyway, that was something that sent me to bed late last night. Let's move on. Let's talk about this weekend. Beterbiev against Bivol. Is this one of the best fights we've ever previewed?
Well, without question, it's one of them. I think it's a worthwhile discussion as to whether it's the best. I suppose we will have our answer on Saturday night if it delivers on the gargantuan promise that comes along with it. I am really excited about this. I also recall saying I am really excited about this about at least 6 or 7 fights that we've previewed. So I'm not sure if I'm more or less excited this time, but most certainly my juices are flowing for this fight.
It's a cracker. It's a cracker. Bivol's favourite. Just.
He wasn't when it was announced, so that has switched, and I think there's a big reason for why that has switched, and I think there's an awful lot of chat about Beterbiev being 39 years old and the fact that it was postponed, because this, of course, should have taken place on June the 1st. Now, it's postponed due to an injury to Beterbiev, and there's an awful lot of people out there either that have suffered from this injury or have worked in the medical field that are saying, if it's what they say it is, he should have been out for months. And here he is back 3 months later. Or at the very least, he should be just about starting training now, not being ready for a fight. This isn't the first.
Just elaborate on that.
Elaborate on
the injury
and the severity of the injury. Yeah. I forget I haven't got the term in front of me here. But there's footballers, there's athletes that have suffered from the same injury, and they've been out for a long time. There was an example somebody quoted of some players in the NBA who did manage to come back 3 or 4 weeks later and play again. But the point was made there that they're in their 20s. They were viewed as almost like freaks of nature for coming back so quickly. And also, they were not coming back to have a boxing match. They were coming back to partake in a team sport. This isn't the first time either that Beterbiev has suffered from an injury. I think 2 of his last 3 fights were also pushed back as a consequence of him being injured. I think Anthony Yard and the Callum Smith fight, I think I'm correct in saying, both of those he had to postpone. All of that will tell you that his body is more than likely starting to break down. He has been an elite athlete for most of his adult life. Let's not just think he's had 20 fights. Let's also consider what that guy achieved in the amateur ranks. He was fighting people like Usyk over a decade ago. So quite naturally, his body will start to rebel against the strict training regime that Beterbiev insists that he undergoes for every single fight. Speaking to people like John Scully, his assistant coach, Scully he's an established coach himself, and some of the older listeners may remember him being a super middleweight and light heavyweight contender back in the 90s. And he said he has never seen anybody train like Beterbiev trains. He has never seen anybody want to keep getting better in their mid to late 30s as Beterbiev. And the interesting thing as well is that he's not remotely a boxing fan. He's got no interest in discussing fights unless they involve him. He's got no interest in getting involved in gym chat about the fight that happened at the weekend. Scully tells a really funny story about Beterbiev coming over after his training session. Mark Ramsey and Scully are in deep conversation about a big fight that had just happened at the weekend. It may even have been something as big as Spence Crawford. Beterbiev looks at them and goes, what are you talking about? You talking about boxing? Nah, I'm out. And just walked straight out of the gym and went home. No interest in it, but he remains studious in terms of himself. He wants to get the best out of himself. And I think the people that are suddenly back in Bivol, as a consequence of all this, should also look at the evidence that we have that he is deteriorating. The only evidence we have is that he has injuries in training, then he sorts himself out, and then he produces a sterling performance when he's in the ring. We haven't seen him erode. There was a few arguments after the Anthony Yard fight, which was January last year, wasn't there, that he was getting hit too often, and that may be a consequence of age. But then he turned in the performance he turned in against Callum Smith, and all of a sudden everybody's saying he is just a freak of nature. Mm-hmm. So I think this is as hard to call as any fight we have previewed. That's what I will say in answer to your original question. I was pretty confident that Crawford would beat Spence. I was pretty confident that Usyk would beat Fury. Not confident either way here at all. And I have written a 2,000-word preview for Boxing Scene. So I've been in the laboratory. And I am still none the wiser on what I think. Now, what I will say is they've had 43 fights between them. So 43 times we've seen their arms raised. 23 times for Bivol, 20 times for Beterbiev. But what I found so difficult to envision, and I don't know if it's because I'm conditioned to seeing them winning and winning so handsomely, what I've just really struggled to envision is either of them losing. I can obviously picture both of them winning, but what I can't envision is either of them losing. I can't imagine seeing Beterbiev bashed around the ring, being stopped, being rescued. I can't see it. I can't even see him being outboxed for large periods. I can't see Bivol with a look of discontentment on his face, or the look of a loser, or the look of hopelessness on his face. I can't see him hauling himself off the canvas after being counted out. There's numerous different scenarios that could develop here. And the more I think about it, and the more I look at everything, and I look at super fights that have gone by, and this might be time to bring back Christie's Cracker. Let's do that. My Christie's Cracker this week is the 16-1 odds for the draw.
How the odds on the draw have changed remarkably. I mean, Benn Eubank 33-1 back in 1993. 33-1. And yet here we are, 3 decades on, and it's halved in price. Yeah, the draw. There's a book on that actually. I think the hole-in-one gang, it might be called, about people who are punting on holes in one. And again, the price on that way back when was probably slightly out of kilter with the stats. But anyway, it could be tight. It could be a fight that ends up where they nullify each other. It could be that Bivol... I mean, can Bivol constantly turn and outbox and frustrate Beterbiev? I'm not sure, but that's surely going to be part of his plan, boxing moving in and out. One thing we know about Bivol, Matt, is that he can look, if not rank ordinary, then he can definitely look substandard as a world champion. We've seen that again and again and again. You know, I suppose he looked like he was going to stop Lyndon Arthur, and Lyndon Arthur's courage kind of got him through, and we ended up with a distance fight. But we can often end up with these, you know, Craig Richards performance, for example. We can end up with these nights from Bivol. And while there are glimpses throughout those 12 rounds where you think, oh yeah, he's pretty good, isn't he? There are 80% of the rounds where you just think, it's this again. It's that again. It's this again. Really? And then you get performances like against Canelo, like he did against a really big southpaw in Gilberto Ramirez, where he's too quick. His feet are too good. He's too clever. He's simply too good of an all-round boxer. Can he do that to Beterbiev?
Yeah, I think he can. I mean, you know, you say boxers have to be switched on, but Bivol has to be more switched on than any boxer has been to stay out the way of Beterbiev. You've got that relentlessness from Beterbiev that Bivol will be well aware of. Bivol will also know that he can't just go in there and pick and poke and be elusive. That's not going to be enough for him to win this fight. At times he's going to have to stand in front of Beterbiev, and he might have to trade with him 1 or 2 times. He needs to get Beterbiev's respect, and he'll have to do that early, I believe. But that's also, one could argue, the key to Beterbiev winning the fight is when Bivol is at his bravest. That might be when Beterbiev is at his most effective. And you start looking at their styles, and I've seen Bivol fight from ringside a couple of times, one of which was when he fought Craig Richards, and the sense that he just had no intention of getting out of first gear because he knew he didn't need to was quite overwhelming from ringside. There were a few people getting overexcited. There were people from Richards' camp thinking that Richards was winning. And I was sat with Chris McKenna, and Chris and I were just going, well, Richards isn't winning this at all, is he? And if Richards was going flat out, it felt like, particularly probably from about rounds 4 to 12, and Bivol was just cruising along next to him. And there's a funny sort of parallel with that thinking when he fought Canelo. Although he was more aggressive against Canelo because he knew he had to be, I still got to the end of that Canelo fight, and as impressive as Bivol was, I still felt that Bivol could have gone to another gear if he wanted to. So what we might see this weekend is that extra gear from Bivol, and we might see one of the best performances that we've ever seen. And he might need that to contain that educated aggression that Beterbiev has got. It's tempting for certain fighters with records of 20-0 and 20 knockouts, particularly established fighters, for them to just get a little bit too drunk on that power and get lazy with other things. We haven't seen that with Beterbiev. He's an underrated boxer. His ring generalship is right up there with the very best in the sport. the way he uses his feet, the way he can control the distance, is arguably the best in the sport. What Bivol does and may do better is he can control the pace of a fight so effectively. And if Bivol can get that pace to his liking, while at the same time containing Beterbiev, then he wins the fight. But that's like saying, well, if you jump off that mountain, you'll get to the bottom quicker than if you were to climb down it. It's just ridiculous. But you can say the same about what Beterbiev needs to do to nullify the best of Bivol. Both of them have got their work cut out. My one hope, if for whatever reason the styles cancel each other out, that's fine. That happens in boxing. We know that can happen. That's okay. If there's a knockout early, there's a knockout early. Okay, thought we were in for 36 minutes of the best boxing we've ever seen, but we've only had 5 minutes. That's all right. But what we don't want is for all our fears about Beterbiev to become true in front of our eyes, as in his knee goes. Or there's a head clash in the first round and one of those cuts that Beterbiev has suffered from in the past just reopens and the fight is in danger of being stopped at any moment as a consequence of it. I want them to be as good as they possibly can be, even if we don't get the fight we want. I just want there to be no arguments at the end of the fight.
I hope so. I really hope so, because they're such quality fighters and they've got very different styles. And I'd hate for this to be a Hay against Bellew, Matt. That would be so disappointing, wouldn't it? That really would be. Let's hope Beterbiev, as you say, he overcame a 9-month absence to just overpower Callum Smith. He'd been out of the ring for a year in the build-up to the Anthony Yard fight. So he's used to overcoming those lengthy absences. Did you see I'm not generally someone who watches the head-to-heads or the face-offs or all of those shows they put together. But did you see the one that BT and Bunsey did with Beterbiev and Bivol?
I haven't seen it yet, no. I'm going to watch that today.
It's really worth watching. Just because, actually, Bunsey does a great job, because that's a hard job for a broadcaster to do, for an interviewer to do, when you've got two guys whose English is limited to an extent, more so Beterbiev's than Bivol's. But to get bits out of them, what you got was this breeding kind of atmosphere. No histrionics, no fireworks, just two guys comfortable in their own skin who don't really like all of that kind of build up hoo-ha PR and marketing. That's not really for them. It's anti them. They're anti that. But even still, the thing that I came away from that was just there's this almost a smirk on the face of Beterbiev. And the one point where Steve Bunce was asking him about kind of why do you think you can beat him, or what have you seen that he does well, what does he not do well, those kind of questions, that kind of discussion. And Beterbiev just kind of almost smirked, slightly bit the inside of his cheek and said, I know what he does. I know what he can and can't do. Just this complete and utter confidence, surety, and an element of knowing. Now, I don't normally like to watch those things because I don't want to feel any of that. I just want to judge what we've seen in the ring. But I did come away thinking, Beterbiev thinks he knows. Whether he does or not, we're going to find out on fight night. Whether he's going to be able to put it into practice, we're going to find out on fight night. But you've got a sense that he thinks he knows. He just knows. We'll see.
He's a confident man. So is Bivol in his own way. He's confident in a different way. And I think psychologically they are both rock solid. Writing something else this week about their respective best performances. And to be perfectly honest, when you're looking at both of them, they both need this fight to solidify their case for being in the Hall of Fame. I know Beterbiev has got this reputation, 20-0, 20 KOs, but then you start breaking it down, and no offence to Anthony Yarde, but when Anthony Yarde might be his second or third best win for Beterbiev, you're like, crikey. And then you look at Bivol, and okay, he had there's two obvious standout wins. There's one that is beyond obvious, the win over Canelo. But then you could play the cynic and go, well, Canelo wasn't a light heavyweight. Okay, well, he beat Gilberto Ramirez, and that was his stellar 2022, wasn't he, where he looked like he was set for liftoff. But you take those two wins away from the record of Bivol, and I think you'd be picking Beterbiev all day long here. I think if you take both of their careers as the sum of all their parts, then Beterbiev has fought at a consistently higher standard and at a consistently higher level. Now, Bivol, as you say, has got some wins where now and again you can see what a really special all-round fighter he is. What I liked was his most recent performance against Zinad, when he was expecting to be fighting Beterbiev when he started his training camp, and at the end of it he was going in against Zinad, and he was spiteful, he was aggressive, he put on a show, and he doesn't always do that. So I wonder if that's a little hint about how he may approach this particular fight with Beterbiev. Because he knows that, as I know I'm repeating myself, but he knows he has to be aggressive in there. He can't just stand back and hope to just counter Beterbiev's head off. Beterbiev is too good for that. He's too clever for that. So I am hoping, and I'm hoping that this is going to be one of those high-class, high-drama firefights. And there was a part of me yesterday thinking, is this going to be one of those fights? And this is just from following the sport for as long as I can remember, from when I was a little kid. Is this going to be one of those fights that when it ends, we're like, what was all the fuss about? Bivol wins a stinker, wins every round, or Beterbiev just walks through him, just makes Bivol look ordinary, makes it not look like a 50-50 at all. Because I think, in retrospect, Crawford-Spence, we were all going gaga over that beforehand. We were number one on the wish list for so long, and I don't want to downplay the performance of Crawford because he was supersonic on that night. That was incredible. I think Elliot Wurzel, who's probably been ringside more times than I have over the years, said that's the best performance he's ever seen in his entire life. But you look back on that now, and you're not going to say that was a great fight. It was a great performance, but I think we can now say that was a letdown because of the one-sided nature of it. And I wonder if this may turn out like that. I've got a feeling it won't, though.
Well, if you're in the Bivol business, I mean, everything, logic dictates he'll be in and out, turning, moving. It's all about the footwork. But then again, really, to put Beterbiev on the back foot might be plan A, really. That might be the best thing you could do to stop the charge, the march, to nullify some of the best of Beterbiev. I feel, Matt, that there has to come a moment in the fight where Beterbiev's going to hurt Bivol. And although he's not looked that kind of character, Bivol, I just wonder, Beterbiev's the kind of guy, when he hits and hurts you, I think panic sets in. I think he just makes you panic. And he's intimidating anyway. I don't think Bivol's the type to get intimidated. He's very comfortable in his own boxing skin. But I do think Beterbiev's a different beast animal. And I think if he can hit and hurt Bivol, then I think that will change the fight.
You would think so. We don't know. We haven't really seen any evidence of Bivol exhibiting questionable punch resistance. But then you look back at certain fights, and there are moments, as of course there will be in every boxing career. We sometimes presume that because of what they put themselves through, that they can't get hurt, or we're a little bit critical if a forceful jab wobbles a boxer. Imagine being clouted by one of those yourself. But there was a moment in the Joe Smith Jr. fight at the end of, it was either end of round, I think it was end of round 10, and it was right on the bell. I think there was some argument that it might have come after the bell, and Smith lands a hefty shot, lands flush on Bivol, and Bivol is unsteady in the extreme. And you then wonder, well, what if Beterbiev lands one of those midway through the round and then follows up? So there is, of course, Bivol could just fall apart. We don't know. I think any light heavyweight that hasn't encountered Beterbiev might claim that they've never been knocked down and they can't be hurt, and then they face Beterbiev. I think positively for Bivol is that Beterbiev has been in positions in fights where he's been down on the cards, so he can, and on both occasions he was being forced back. Gvozdyk and Anthony Yarde. Yarde was up on 2 of the 3 cards at the point where everything just got too much for him. I think up until the point of the 10th round stoppage for Beterbiev, Gvozdyk was leading on the cards as well, although that was a much closer fight. So there's hope out there for Bivol. And initially, before I went into the preview laboratory, I was thinking I was going to pick Bivol. But I was bouncing around in there, going this way and that. At one point, I was convinced that Beterbiev was going to stop him. That should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of this matchup. Because you may think you know everything there is to know about these two fighters, and then you go and research them for a few hours and you find all sorts of wonders and qualities that you'd forgotten about or didn't even know about. They have both got so much in their locker. They both look like elite fighters. They both look like they could live with any light heavyweight in history. And this might just be one of the best fights in light heavyweight history. Let's all hope so. I have got a feeling about this one. This is one of those fights, and I haven't done it. Do you know the last time I did it? This is one of those fights where you talk to those people that flit in and out of boxing now and again, and you say, all right, we'll watch this fight and then you'll see what all the fuss is about. You know the last time I did that? I haven't done it since. Carl Frampton versus Scott Quigg.
The curse of Christie! The curse of Christie! Oh no, you've done it. Right, who wins? I've gone Beterbiev. I can certainly see Bivol winning on points and maybe looking dynamite mustard, but I've gone for Beterbiev. I just think he will hurt Bivol at some stage, and I think that panic will set in.
I'm going for the draw, and I don't care if people say I'm sitting on the fence. I couldn't give a flying shoot. I couldn't care less, because and I'll tell you why I'm going for the draw is because I cannot come to any conclusion, and I've looked at everything, and I cannot come to a conclusion that I'm happy with. And I think if it is as closely contested as I expect it to be, why shouldn't it be a draw? Wilder Fury was a draw. Golovkin Canelo was a draw, and we haven't seen one for a while in a big fight like this. We do get draws when they're close fights, so I'm just going to go for the draw, and I'm happy with that.
He's been desperate to throw in some randoms over the last few weeks, hasn't he? He's been absolutely itching to throw in randoms. And you know what? Every time I think about Artur Beterbiev, my mind just drifts back to the conversations that I used to have with the late Ron Lewis, who I would, he didn't say in so many words, I know he's a big fan of Floyd, but I think Beterbiev was probably one of Big Ron's favourite fighters.
He was.
Had utter belief in Artur Beterbiev becoming the best light heavyweight on the planet. And he and I used to have conversations about that. And Ron Lewis would have loved this fight. He would have loved this fight.
Oh, he would. I often think of Ron when I'm writing about certain things or certain instances. When you attend boxing events, he was the kind of mainstay, wasn't he? But yeah, he most certainly thought the world of Artur Beterbiev's talents inside a boxing ring. And there's quite a few people that I respect that rate Beterbiev highly. And I must admit, if this fight was made 2 years ago, I'd have picked Beterbiev, even if it was made after the Canelo and Ramirez kind of masterclasses from Bivol, I would have picked it then. But as much as I said at the start that we have no evidence of his body deteriorating if you only look at his performances in the ring, logically, at his age and the way he trains, he will at some point encounter some problems in the ring. And when faced with something like Bivol, I think he may struggle. But yeah, sticking with the draw, sticking with it, 16-1. Bet your mortgage on it, everybody, and then take out a Patreon subscription.
Bet responsibly. Bet responsibly, folks. Bet responsibly. Opatai is 22-1 on to beat Jack Massey. Eubank's 25-1 on, 1-25 to beat Jerameta. Sky Nicholson's 1-6 to beat Raven Chapman, though that's going to be a nice clash of styles. Nicholson, who is focusing on Tiara Brown and Amanda Serrano as her next couple of fights, but Chapman is going to bring it, so I'm looking forward to that one. But really, the fight of the night, besides Beterbiev Bivol, is Wardley Clark in a rematch, and the bookies can hardly split them. Like the big one, Wardley is just favourite over Clark, who is slight odds against. Matt, in what way can what happened first time around influence what happens this time in the rematch? Who can be better? Who will have learned most? Who might train differently, better, smarter? Those are maybe some of the questions at the heart of this.
I think Wardley's been the most vocal in saying that he knows what he did wrong last time and he can correct that, and that's fine. I do wonder if the truly hellaciously grueling nature of that first fight will affect them both a little bit. And I think the likeliest it's to affect, if it is only to affect one, would be Fraser Clark. There were times in that fight where I thought that Clark was on the brink of giving Wardley a boxing lesson. There were times where it looked like Wardley was about to get stopped, and Wardley just kept coming back. And I'm sure as much as they both say publicly they can't wait for this fight, there'll be a little bit in one or both of them that will be thinking, oh God, that took me about 3 weeks to get over that last fight. That was horrible. That was really a rough and tough fight. And often, after such a thrilling encounter, the rematch fails to reach those heights. And I think part of it is because of the psychological scars that were inflicted first time round. So I do wonder if we're expecting too much, if we're expecting another thriller second firefight. I haven't examined this one nearly as much as I've examined the other one, but instinctive, even though I thought Clark was unlucky not to get the decision first time round, if I was going to make a pick here, I would pick Fabio Wardley to win this fight. Interesting.
Well, I suppose Wardley might be fresher, mightn't he? I suppose the way I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, how much better can Wardley be in boxing terms, technically? How much better can he be? Maybe he can. Maybe that's what he's talking about, that he knows what he has to do better. Maybe that's right. How much better physically and mentally can Fraser Clark be? Because that's the key for him. If he can improve in those departments, then I think he'll win. If it boils down to physicality and youth, then maybe freshness, then maybe it's Wardley who comes out on top. But Fraser Clark's got the minerals. There's no doubt about that. He's got the mindset. He has had a long career. You know, they had punishing fights with Joe Joyce in the amateurs again and again and again. He's had a long time at this. And at the age of 33, could it all come apart at the seams? I'd just edge towards Fraser Clark being mentally and physically better this time around, and therefore able to sustain those periods throughout the first fight where he was just simply much better.
That's a very sensible argument. I think I thought Clark would win the first one. I just thought he'd be too clever and too educated for Fabio Wardley. I think I've been too harsh on Wardley's chances in several fights he's had. Because of his background, he's from a white-collar background, therefore he can't be any good at boxing, can he? Because he hasn't been doing it all his life. Mm-hmm. Well, he's got something. He's got something in him. I'm not saying he's going to go on and be a world champion. I think that's too much of a hill for him to climb. But at this level, he has got something that his opponents may not have when they need it the most. But I mean, if Clark wins and Clark ends up winning 10 of the 12 rounds, if Clark stops him, I won't be remotely surprised. But if I have to make a pick, I'd pick Wardley. Just on the evidence of the first fight and what he came through and what I believe he's more than willing to come through again.
I suppose what we might see, Wardley-Clark rematch, there's echoes of that in our fight from this week in history, isn't there? What will happen on the back of an absolute barn burner first time around? Will we get a repeat of that again? Or will they know too much? That is what's going to bleed into this week. And this week, we take you back to the 90s, to a time when boxing was on terrestrial telly. Millions of people were tuning in, and Benn and Eubank were household names. They'd fought 3 years previously in one of the most bitter, bloodiest and violent boxing matches ever to take place in a ring. And we know a man who was there ringside on that night. In fact, we know a man who was in that ring earlier on the very same night. He is a friend of the pod. Not only is he a friend of the pod, he's a patron as well too, folks. He is Mr. Barry Jones with his recollections of Benn Eubank 2.
Benn and Eubank 2. What a night that was, and what great memories for me. The biggest show I'd boxed on ever, actually, but for that date it was huge. I remember the week before, early hours of Sunday morning, late Saturday nights, I was in my local rugby club with curry and chips in a polystyrene tray, sulking because I was watching Lennox Lewis defend his world title against Frank Bruno in Cardiff, and I couldn't get on the bill. And being a ticket seller, I was really disappointed. And then went home, had a sleep, got up in the afternoon. I had a phone call off my trainer, Pat Thomas, saying you're boxing next Saturday in Old Trafford on Benn and Eubank, the rematch. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't care who it was. I'm just on a big bill, and that was fantastic. It turned out to be John White, an undefeated kid from Salford, who I later found out from Robin Reed was a really big puncher, but that never really came into play that night because I boxed one of the best I'd boxed. I dropped him, which is a novelty for me, I know, and then went on to win on points. And yeah, that was my first real taste of the big time and what it took. You know, being around big, great fighters, big name fighters, you realise what it takes to be a great fighter, and it gives you sort of an inspiration to want to try and achieve that. So seeing that was great, but the night was tremendous. Whole day, I got there really early, soaked in the atmosphere when there was before anyone really got there. Just being in that great football stadium. And it was it was mad. I remember it was delayed. The fight was delayed because people wouldn't sit down in their seats. It was drizzling. It wasn't raining so much, it was drizzling. It wasn't great weather. It was in October. And but it was just madness. It was madness. So it got delayed for like 20 minutes. And remember, it's live on ITV, so there's not much wiggle room to show the fight. Anyway, the fight happened, and it wasn't as good as the first one, nowhere near as good as the first one, but the drama and the anticipation was tingling through the whole arena and the whole stadium. Everyone thought Nigel Benn won, including myself, and he didn't get it. It was a draw. And my biggest memory was I went backstage after. I was thinking my dressing room was the away dressing room. I think Eubank's dressing room was the home dressing room, and I think Nigel Benn had the manager's office, I think, as his dressing room, if I can remember rightly. But I remember I'm in the corridor and they've walked past each other after the fight, and the hatred that we've all heard that was built up was obviously legend in boxing history. But they walked past each other, and I thought, here they go, this is going to kick off. And they just smiled at each other. And I couldn't understand why until later. And I just realised they just cleared £1 million each. I mean, you're talking 1993. Two domestic rivals, and they cleared £1 million each. So I was told. And that's why they smiled at each other. Because even though I don't think they were best of friends, they knew how to play their part. They knew the role of old dog to build the fight. Who's the villain, who's the hero, and not just give us a great first fight, an interesting second fight, and we didn't get the third fight, and maybe that was sort of missing. But yeah, it was a great occasion, great night, and I know, and lives in history as one of the biggest nights in British boxing.
Barry at the coalface, loving every minute of that, Matt, and I mean, what an experience. I mean, we've watched the whole ITV broadcast back. It's about 1 hour and 20 or something, isn't it? It's absolute TV gold dust. It's absolutely fantastic.
It really is. I remember watching this fight live on the night. So I've seen that broadcast before. And at the time, I thought that Benn had won it and won it well. Back then, believe it or not, I used to keep a diary. And I didn't update it every day, but just now and again. And I would often be writing about Chris Eubank. Not as often as I was writing about a particular girl I had a crush on and she didn't even know I existed. But often I would be writing about Chris Eubank in this diary. And I was perplexed as to why he kept getting the rub of the green with the officials' decisions. So I thought I'll watch this with completely fresh eyes and see if I still think that Benn won the fight. But what I found whilst watching this, I was just so entertained watching Chris Eubank. Not necessarily Chris Eubank box, just Chris Eubank be Chris Eubank. And I've spent a bit of time with him in recent years. And I tell you who I've got to know really well is Ronnie Davis, who I used to think was one of the most terrifying looking human beings on planet Earth. Yeah. But he's so adorable, Ronnie. But watching those two together in this fight was superb. What a double act.
Those ring walks. I mean, Barry talking about how great it was to be there. The atmosphere is absolutely sparkling, isn't it? There's a bit of a football crowd there. I know a pal of mine who's a United fan. He went to that match as a young man. I remember him telling me how tasty the atmosphere was that night. I think it was a few hoolies in tow that night among the 41,000. You heard Barry talking about that as well. Barry had a 4-round points win to move to 5-0 early on in his career. Gutted that he hadn't been on the Cardiff bill between Lennox Lewis and Bruno the week before. What a time in boxing it was, wasn't it? But Barry, a week later, got the late call up. He was on the Benn Eubank 2 bill on the undercard. I mean, what an experience that must have been. But the ring walks, Matt. I mean, talk about two fighters so happy to be alive, so glad to be there. I mean, both of them, Eubank with Barry Hearn on his shoulder. Interestingly, Barry Hearn, he's wearing a headset and a walkie-talkie, obviously in communication either to hear the music, to hear the production the broadcast team behind the scenes. Maybe we'll have to find out about that. But there's no doubt that had echoes of what had happened in 1990 when there was a bit of jiggery-pokery with Eubank's ring walk tunes. And I think Barry Hearn was very much connected in every way in this rematch. He's right on the shoulder of Eubank, who is snarling and smiling and shouting at the crowd, just loving it. And then Benn, he looks in such great shape, doesn't he, Benn? But he is so happy to be there, so comfortable in his own skin, so pleased to be alive and to be part of this. Maybe the £1 million fee that he was getting compared to Eubank's 850,000 was part of that. But he knows he's in great shape. They've had to wait. Finally, they've got each other back in the ring and they're part of this huge event. Those ring walks, oh my goodness me. I was stamping my feet, pumping my head to the club tunes. I was smiling. I was loving every moment of it. It was such a wonderful trip down into the history books of 3 decades ago.
What was the tune? What was Benn's tune?
The tune was The Good Men Give It Up. The Good Men Give It Up.
Is that what it was? I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
Give it up. And then just the drums.
Yeah.
Just this big, long drum, almost like a pipe drum set. And Ben's waving his hands. He's almost dancing to the music as he's coming in. Interestingly as well, Matt, says a little bit about Nigel Benn throughout his early part of his career, really. But on his right shoulder, if you watch the ring walk again, is one of the Essex boys, Tony Tucker, who he'd be shot dead 3 years later, wasn't he? He was one of the Essex boys, gangster drug dealers of the early 90s. He's on Benn's shoulder as part of his ring walk. Some of the circles that Nigel Benn moved in back in those days. What a ring walk. Wow.
Yeah, he was exceptionally confident. He was eager for that rematch in a way that Chris Eubank wasn't eager for that rematch. Eubank now will say that he didn't want the rematch, largely because of the pain that he was forced to endure first time round. But Benn arguably is a little bit too excited. I think really the only period that I thought Eubank had any real success was early on, and that's when Benn was just trying far too hard to take Eubank's head off early on. You can see him mocking the famous Eubank stance, can't you, just before the opening bell. But the whole production of this, I just found it so entertaining. You've got Jim Rosenthal, you've got Reg Guttridge and Jim Watt on comms. Jim Watt
John McCrurick doing the betting.
I made a note of John McCrurick. I was thinking that could be a job for you, Steedo. You could become the new John McCrurick, couldn't you? Just grow those sideburns. But yeah, you got all sorts of people there, haven't you? But you've got Jim Watt being critical of the boxers in a way that you likely won't hear today. Most certainly wouldn't be encouraged anyway. You've got Gary Newbon being rather prickly with absolutely everybody he's interviewing in a way that they wouldn't be today. Real snapshot of the time. But I don't think the entertainment in any way was affected by that. The fact that it was an hour and 20 minutes as opposed to 6 hours, it flew by, the hour and 20 minutes. But as I said at the start, it was Eubank for me. What a showman he was. I must have burst out laughing about 4 times during the fight. And that is just incredible. That little tap that he does. And after the first round, when he is just basking in the boos and the cheers, Ronnie Davis is next to him, rolling his eyes, thinking he's not coming back for this minute break, is he? I'll go over to him and just give him some water. He gives him some water while he's in. Eubank's still essentially in ring centre, and doesn't he? Ronnie at that point in the fight doesn't even bother. He knows he's not going to get anything out of him. Eubank is just high as a kite on the atmosphere at that point and the occasion. But then you do see Ronnie doing what Ronnie used to do, where quite famously he would slap Eubank round the face, and he would get quite animated and angry when he felt that Eubank's focus was waning. But in that first round, after that first round, it was like Ronnie was like, no, He's not going to hear anything I say to him right now. I'm not even going to bother. And just the look of the look of just like hopelessness on his face as he walks over to Eubank, I thought was comedy gold. And as I said at the top of the show, someone needs to make a film out of this. They would look a little bit ridiculous, those two, if you tried to make out this was a true story to people that didn't know what Eubank was like in the ring. An incredible character that I didn't really appreciate at the time, because I, as a young boxing fan, felt that numerous of his opponents deserved the decision against him, and it used to really wind me up. I was full on a Nigel Benn fan at this point in time when I watched it, and I did wonder if that had skewed my ability to read the fight when I watched it for the first time, because I was convinced that Nigel Benn had won that fight. But as a spectacle, if you've got an hour and 20 minutes, and if you haven't, just make an hour and 20 minutes and just watch this from start to finish. Even when you've got a rather vanilla Lennox Lewis being interviewed and he's not saying an awful lot of value at all, even that amused me no end. I've got to be honest. It was such a good watch. Did you score it?
Yeah, I did. I did actually. Yeah, 114, 113 Benn, but it was tight, really tight. I don't think maybe Eubank was given enough credit early on. I thought he's really sharp with his counters in the first round. He landed a couple of right hands in the third. They actually fought at the start of the fifth, didn't they? That was the one part of the whole fight where we got a bit of fight number one, where they just went at each other early on in that fifth. Benn fell through the ropes towards the end. There was a couple of little moments. Eubank slipped. Was he punched? There's a few little moments where maybe you could have analysed and looked into it a little deeper. I suppose the sixth round is the key part, when Benn has a point taken off for repeated low blows, and finally referee Larry O'Connell took a point off in that sixth. I gave that round to Eubank as a 10-8. Barry McGuigan, I think, gave the round to Benn and made it a 9-9. So it probably depends how you view that round sixth and the point taken off. That's the difference maker for me, and I'd still have Benn just winning the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I had it 115, 113 for Benn, and that was with me greatly enjoying everything that Chris Eubank was doing. I thought Benn probably was hard done by. It would have been 116, 113 without the point reduction. I think probably what annoyed me at the time was the 115, 113 for Eubank. And I think, I must admit, if I was to watch it again, I think I would struggle to give any more rounds to Eubank than I gave to Benn. So I think we can say that Benn probably deserved to win that fight. I think you could just about make a case for a draw, but I certainly couldn't make a case that Chris Eubank won that fight. And I think his reaction post-fight was almost like one of relief. And I think he almost admitted it when he was in conversation with Gary Newbond, that he was lucky to get a draw. And it was only when he got his wits about him and Jimmy Tibbs is next to him saying, my man deserved to win, that Eubank suddenly started on the, no, he didn't. But yeah, I think, and I think I've spoke to Eubank about the first fight a lot. And we haven't had many conversations about the second one. I'd be really interested to get more from him on that.
Sign of the times, this fight. Nigel Kennedy, the violinist, is part of the anthems. The spiky-haired punk violinist from the 90s is part of that as well. You have that wonderful line from Reg Guttridge when Eubank vaults over the ropes and he says, "The ego has landed." One of Reg's favourites.
Is that the first time he'd said that? Because I
feel like I'd heard it before, but it doesn't sound like Reg to be repeating it. But yeah. I felt like I'd heard it before. But yeah, he says it in that fight.
maybe that's where it was born, and then it was just replayed and replayed and replayed.
Yeah.
Because I was exceptionally familiar with it, but when I heard it, I was like, is this the fight where he came up with that? I thought as a double act as well. My favourite double act was Ronnie and Eubank, but another double act that I really enjoyed was Jim Watt and Reg Guttridge. They were so good together. You have kind of Reg's conversational style, not once attempting to try and appear too clever. He leaves all of that stuff to Jim Watt, and I thought, as a double act, I thought they were great. And at the time, as you're living through it, you kind of just you don't appreciate it. That might be something to do with age and what have you. But now I thought that was a really good mix, Reg Guttridge and Jim Watt.
Yeah, Watt's really critical of both Benn and Eubank in this fight. You can understand why. Benn oftentimes quite wild. Eubank, if he misses with a counter, then ends up in no man's land and somehow has to find a plan B for kind of getting out of there, and looks a bit awkward and clumsy. So this wasn't the fight to advertise their skills, but Watt straight in there. As Matt says, all the broadcasters in this generally doing their jobs. Observant, critical, neutral, punchy at times, really good stuff. And the interesting sort of subplot alongside this is the presence of Michael Nunn, the IBF champion ringside for this one. He wants one of these big names. It shows you the power and the cachet of Benn and Eubank at this time. Where you've got guys like Nunn and James Toney had beaten him previously. They're all kind of in the mix as well. Roy Jones Jr., of course, at that time as well. But Benn and Eubank were two of the kind of cash cows, two of the big names, two of the would-be opponents. And Michael Nunn is ringside for this one. He wants the winner. Sounds like they're trying to squeeze that. But in actual fact, Eubank goes on to fight Roccagiani. But Nigel Benn and Michael Nunn, they appear on the same Earl's Court bill next time out, Matt, where Nigel Benn goes 12 with Henry Wharton, and Michael Nunn's supposed to win his fight against Steve Little. Then I'm assuming they're going to fight. And lo and behold, Michael Nunn loses a split decision on that Earl's Court undercard to Stevie Little, and the Benn fight's gone.
Let's never do Michael Nunn versus Steve Little in This Week in History. That is one of the worst fights I've ever seen. I actually do think Michael Nunn was a touch unlucky in that particular fight. But anyway, it was so drab and so uneventful. But you had Don King there as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
And of course, Don King had designs on both fighters, and it has been reported on numerous times that it was agreed that he would sign both the winner and the loser. So when it was a draw, he went away empty-handed. There was nothing whatsoever in the contract about a draw. They managed to get one over on Don King. And I think that is also why it was difficult for certain fights with leading Americans of that time, leading American super middleweights, to be made.
In the preview of the fight on the night on the ITV coverage, there's a brilliant line from Eubank that turns out to be portentous. And he says simply, he can't win, meaning Nigel Benn, and I can't lose. Ultimately, he was absolutely spot on, Eubank, on the night, but maybe a little fortunate for that to be the case. That's Benn Eubank 2. Thanks to Barry Jones for his input on that. What an experience that must have been for a young prospect to be on that big bill. The atmosphere, the ring walks, well worth your time to go back and watch that ITV coverage, which is available on YouTube. And we'll have a bonus pod coming up later on this week for you Patreons. I do believe there's been a problem locating the Opening Bell podcast on the Patreon app and online. I have sent them a message about that, so we're trying to get a response to make sure that is absolutely visible, so it's easy for you to sign up. I think if you Google it and Google us, then you will be able to do it one way or another. But I'm in the process of liaising with Patreon regarding that, and we'll get to the bottom of it. We really appreciate all you Patreons, and we move on we move on with a spring in our step, with hope in our heart, and with love of boxing very much at our core. And thanks for being part of it. We'll speak again soon. Take care.